Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Around the Table live virtual event. Please welcome our moderator, Darren Unhoff. Take it away, Darren.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to what I believe is our second Around the Table with CHS. I recognize many names on the attendee list, but for those I haven't met, my name is Darren Unhoff. I lead the energy business here at CHS, and I want to thank you for investing some time with us today. We'll keep it to about an hour, and I know for most of you on Central Time that you're investing your lunch hour with us. I know we've got some a little further west or east, either way, so a little different time of day for you. I got a few colleagues with me to share some insights today that we hope you find valuable. Before we get started, just a little bit of an overview. Today we're going to talk around this virtual table about navigating, what has been just an incredible amount of change and is an incredible amount of uncertainty in the energy space. And while most of you attending are pretty familiar with what we mean by energy at CHS and across the cooperative system, just to be clear, it involves products like gasoline and diesel fuel, propane, and lubricants, and increasingly renewable fuels as well. And we just had things come at us from all sorts of directions, and I know that's the same for each of you in your businesses. Of course, we've had a global pandemic that caused the biggest demand shock in really the modern history of the refined product space. But we've also had an administration change in DC, and we've got government affairs experts with us today to talk a little bit about those implications. Some historically severe weather that hit a big part of the energy supply chain in the southern U.S. and specifically along the Texas Gulf that has had a lot of implications. Seeing tremendous growth in a product called renewable diesel, and that's a lot of conversation around what role that product plays. We'll talk about that a little bit. And of course, we're now just on the back end of a really strong spring for most of the cooperative system with a crop that is largely in the ground. Here in Minnesota, we're getting a nice rain. I hope those of you that need that rain have gotten it or are getting it, one of the two. But it's a day that I know a lot of people in this region appreciate for sure. Before we get to our plan topics that focus, largely around more of the refined products, the gasoline and diesel part of the business, especially for those of you that have put a lot of corn acres in the ground. It's never too early to start thinking about possible propane needs for the fall. And I know you might say, well, we got the crop in pretty well on time, if not a little ahead. But we know from being around this business a long time that crop drying years and demand can really sneak up on the industry and really challenge the supply chain. So now that we've got a crop planted, it's never too early to be working with our team, if you're a local cooperative or if you're a producer with your cooperative, on what we think those needs are going to look like. We know from experience, the better plan we have going in, those are the folks that experience way less unplanned disruption. So a little plug there, just never too early to start thinking about that. Now I want to introduce a few colleagues who are joining me around this virtual table today. First is Jason Schwantz, somebody many of you here know. Jason leads all the commercial aspects of our refined fuels business for CHS, and he's had a long career with us, touching nearly every part of our energy business. So glad to have him share his expertise with us. I'll also be joined by Dustin Holland. Dustin manages trading of our refined fuels products and our renewable fuels products, including the procurement of those renewable fuels products, and a lot of experience in that side of the space. We'll talk with him about things like E15 and renewable diesel. I'm also joined, lastly, by Dan Maurer. Dan is newer to the CHS team. He's joining us from Washington, D.C., where there's a lot going on. We could easily spend the whole hour just talking about change and impacts from the government affairs side. But he leads the government affairs work for CHS, focusing most of his time on the energy industry and issues and topics that really apply to that. Finally, just a reminder, we want this to get your input and your comments and your reactions through this. You'll see a Q&A button somewhere on your screen. On mine, it's towards the bottom of the screen. And at any time, you can click that and enter in, and through the magic of technology, as the moderator, I'll see that question. And if it's a question that it feels right to take, even during the course of our discussion, I'll do that. Most likely, we'll take those as we get through the planned discussions that we've got here. So please, at any time, feel free to throw a question or a comment you'd like us to respond to, and we'll get to hopefully all those, if not as many of those as we can through the course of things. So I want to get started with Jason and talking, kind of broadly about, all these disruptions that have happened. So, Jason, these disruptions like a pandemic, like problems in the Gulf with refineries freezing up. How would you say that's affected the energy space and the refined fuel space you work in every day?
Thank you, Darren. I'd just like to welcome everybody onto our Around the Table Live, and appreciate everybody being here. Now to Darren's question. I'm actually going to tell a little story, and I'm going to go back a little over a year. If you look at a little over a year ago, CHS Refined Fuels, the first 6 months of their year really started off well, and things were going good, cracks were good. Then we got to about March, and this thing, called a pandemic hit. Well, what happened? The country basically came to a standstill. If you look at March, April, May, our volumes dropped on gasoline probably 15 to 20% right off the bat. You look at other places around the country, volumes dropped 40%. Diesel demand was affected some. If you look at it, it wasn't nearly as much as gasoline. If you look at our Cenex brand, I will say during the pandemic, we were affected less. And part of that, I think, is the rural geographies that we tend to live in. That 40% demand drop that I talked about on gasoline, I think if you look at that, the majority of that was in the coasts, where they probably have more people than we do. And a lot more people were affected. So we fast forward, we look at how things are going. We're getting to the summer. Refineries are struggling. They're not making any money. They really had to throttle back and really, really watch their costs. That's some of the things we did. We were watching our costs. Yet we still have to serve our owners, which happened. Fast forward a little bit to this spring. Darren alluded to this. There was an event down in the Gulf where, if you look at Galveston, Corpus Christi, Texas, got to 6 below zero and had a storm, shut down the power. Lots of outages down there. Refineries down there are built for hurricanes. And what do you do when a hurricane comes? You turn on the pump and you pump the water out of there. Well, when they have 6 below weather with that kind of water, I saw some pictures where there was a guy in Corpus Christi standing next to an 8-foot icicle, and they are not used to that. What does that lead to? That leads to a lot of supply disruptions. The Gulf has about 30% of the U.S. production. And what happened? They couldn't run, and then they have to check everything. Now, it isn't like when they have a hurricane and you just, like I said, pump the water out. Now you got to check for cracks, make sure things are okay. And what happened? Again, we lost more supply to the U.S. If you look at our stocks were extremely low going into this spring. But I do have to say, I'm very proud. Our team did a really nice job making sure that we had supply. How do we do that? A lot of it's the inventory that we keep around and making sure that we supply our owners. I'll say this, as a producer, our co-ops do a fantastic job of making sure if there are supply disruptions that the producer or grower never sees it. And these are some of the things that affected the energy space last year, Darren.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. One thing that comes to mind as you were talking about those storms, people might be wondering about our own facilities. And even though Kansas isn't in Texas, we had the same kind of challenges, just incredible weather challenges that even 30 and 35-year employees there told me they'd never seen. Really happy that we did not have to turn down the facility or shut down any units, and we kept everybody safe through that. And we were likely one of the only refineries really from Kansas South that could say that. So that was important to our spring too, Jason, the fact that we could keep that diesel inventory building as we headed into spring. There's all these disruptions. A lot of them are a little closer to the rearview mirror, right? The storm's over. The pandemic maybe it's still with us, but the demand effects seem to be passing. What should people be thinking about now as they look towards summer, whether it's supply or price, or what's on your mind there?
Yep. I think if you look, I was on some radio stations earlier in the spring, and quite frankly, I'm not going to take credit for the recommendation I give that you should fill up then, because it pretty much was a no-brainer. Demands were really low, inventories were low. You needed to fill up, and especially with this spring coming. I think going into the summer, it's actually going to be a little more difficult to predict. I think, if you look at our inventory levels in Magellan, New Star, actually pretty much in the entire CHS system, inventories are really, really low on products. And I think that could be a little bit dangerous. I think you see some of these refineries ramping up and things are getting better. I think you're going to see some pent up driving demand, thus driving gasoline prices up. I think if you look at diesel fuel, we kind of are maybe just going to ride along here, sitting at these values. I will always say this, though, when we're preparing for the fall, do I think it's smart to get some, in your pipeline and make sure that, you have some on hand? Of course I do. And I think you never know when the next event could happen. I know they're already talking about hurricane seasons. And as I said, it's going to take a while for that system to heal up. So I think you've got to be careful, watch it, make sure you stay on top of it. Make sure you have your tanks full. I'm always going to say that. But if you look at that, worked really well in the spring. And as I said, our cooperative system does a really nice job of making sure that the consumer never really feels this.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jason. A lot going on, and I think your advice is good. It's in my view, it's always a good day to fill the tank, but I think with these uncertainties, it's more so that way than ever. I think we should transition now and bring my colleague Dustin on, and let's shift gears just a little bit and talk more about the renewable part of this space and the change happening there. Dustin, I can barely pick up a newspaper or open my email without something about renewable diesel. Sometimes I get confused between that and biodiesel. Just talk to us a little bit broadly about what's happened in renewables, and maybe give the audience a bit of a view on how we're looking at renewable diesel.
Yeah, thanks, Darren, and thanks everyone for joining here today. I guess I'd start the conversation by describing the same whipsaw effects we've seen in the supply and demand balances for gasoline and diesel translate pretty much one for one over to renewable fuel. The same impacts around the pandemic and winter storm caused some impacts to production of renewable fuel and, of course, demand for renewable fuel. But the picture going forward is rather compelling, and it's a good question about renewable diesel. Is obviously a very hot topic lately. Lots of announcements in the headlines over renewable diesel production to come online over the next several years. Biodiesel, of course, has been around with us for several decades, and CHS has been interacting with that fuel for quite some time. The difference is so biodiesel is produced using veg oils and other fats through a process called transesterification. It's oftentimes a biodiesel plant is adjacent to a soybean crush plant or some sort of veg oil crush plant, then producing a biodiesel product. Renewable diesel, on the other hand, using the same veg oils and fats and oils, is produced using a hydrotreating process similar to the petroleum industry. So a lot of these announcements you've seen have been traditional petroleum refiners that are converting their facilities to make renewable diesel. The outcome, or the difference between those two products, and both are high quality products, But renewable diesel has some better cold weather handling characteristics than biodiesel, which allows it to be shipped in existing pipeline infrastructure, handled with existing terminal infrastructure, that type of thing. So that's a real force behind renewable diesel, and why I think we'll see even more of a thrust as renewable diesel comes online.
So Dustin, if we peel that back just one more layer for the audience, somebody might in a state like Minnesota or North Dakota or Nebraska or places where we do a lot of business might be wondering, well, when will I get some renewable diesel? Maybe they've been buying some biodiesel or want to buy some biodiesel. Maybe add in there is some state programs on the West Coast that are also a real driving force to kind of build this industry on the renewable side, because the economics are a little different to run that through a traditional refining process versus the biodiesel approach.
Yeah, absolutely, Darren. A key difference between producing biodiesel and renewable diesel is the capital structure required to do so. And so the onset of renewable diesel has really been spurred by primarily the California low carbon fuel standard and some other programs in Oregon and the state of Washington that are developing as well. So you're exactly right. The renewable diesel that is being produced today and is slated for production in the near future is all pointed towards the West Coast at this point to capture the incentives associated with those West Coast LCFS programs, low carbon fuel standard, but renewable diesel and biodiesel as well not only qualify for that California program, but also for the federal renewable fuel standard from a RIN generation standpoint.
Yeah. So those are the kind of things that are really getting the renewable diesel industry off the ground, and we're seeing a lot of activity there. I suspect that will continue. We have a lot of people, I assume, 100 plus people joining us that are involved in soybeans in one way or another, either producing, marketing, buying. I know in our own business, we operate a couple of crush plants where we buy a lot of soybeans through the cooperative system. Big impact in that part of it. I mean, what would you say that looks like for somebody that is a stakeholder in the business of soybean demand?
Yeah, the outlook for producing feedstocks for renewable fuel in general right now is very compelling. We have a little over 600 million gallons of renewable diesel production today, and there's been about 4 billion gallons of new production that's been announced. Even if half of that 4 billion gallons of new production gets built, it puts a considerable strain on the veg oil supply chain, tightens the veg oil and other fats, S&Ds considerably. And it's been one of the drivers of why soybean and corn prices have been rallying here, up 25 cents a bushel on both corn and soybeans here earlier today.
Yeah, just more evidence that that grain and energy are more tightly wound together than probably ever in our careers. Let's talk about another aspect of that on the move to the ethanol side. What's on your mind about ethanol and things like E15 amidst all this?
Yeah, another compelling picture for the ethanol side as well. E15, 15% ethanol in gasoline is a relatively new product over the past few years to come online when EPA issued a partial waiver and extended Reid vapor pressure waiver, granted an RVP waiver across that product as well. And E15, although it's only offered at less than 2% of retail stations across the nation today, there's a compelling growth picture, and especially in the Midwest. Iowa, recent data out of Iowa suggests that greater than 10% of retail stations there are selling E15. And of course, CHS is participating in that E15 as well. We started well over a year ago embarking on a process to get E15 set up on behalf of our 1,400 plus Cenex retail locations. We have a CHS misfueling mitigation plan, which is one of the regulatory requirements for offering E15 that's available to all of our sites to use in order to offer compliant E15 throughout our network. Beyond that, we became a registered manufacturer of E15, which allows us to blend and sell E15 throughout our terminal network. As we sit today, we have 11 terminals throughout our network that are offering E15, and we're working on expanding that number of terminal offerings here greatly over the next couple of months. Beyond that, the Cenex brand has a long history of being supportive of E15 and higher level blends of ethanol under its canopy. And the brand recently made an announcement here at the beginning of this year that E15 would be recognized as one of the 2 grades of gas minimum under the brand agreements for E15 to qualify as one of those grades of gas. So that we think we're pretty unique in that space, and that helps also pave the way for more E15 growth.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. I know it's something that the team's been working on really hard. Is how do we make E15 easier for particularly Cenex branded marketers to put into their mix when they choose to do it, if they're in a market area that they think that works, that we can make that easier. And I think some of the steps you mentioned are maybe not work we would say is done, because there's a lot of regulatory issues to deal with in that. We deal with a lot of third parties to deliver our products, pipelines and such, but I want the audience to know that it's priority, and we've got some evidence of progress on that, pretty significant progress the last several months. Speaking of regulatory things, I think we'll bring my third colleague on here, Dan Maurer. We talked a little bit here with Dustin about renewable fuels, about some E15 regulations, but when you think, more broadly about federal policy, what's on your mind about renewable fuels and discussions you find yourself in on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, thanks, Darren, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. To be with you. I think as it relates to E15, one of the major things certainly E15 and expansion of availability came just about a year ago from the previous administration when they certified year-round E15 availability. We're going to be hitting the 1-year anniversary in just a couple of days on May 31st. So that went a real long ways to allow for ethanol and E15 to be offered at more locations, incentivize folks to offer E15. But so regulatorily, that was very helpful. That was a welcome development. But Dustin also hit on a few other regulatory hurdles to offering E15. He mentioned our misfueling mitigation plan, which CHS has in place, as well as both of our ethanol facilities being EPA certified. There are 2 other major ones, fuel pump labeling and underground storage tanks, which are currently out under what's called a notice of proposed rulemaking. So EPA is looking to update those the regulations regarding labels on the fuel pumps and underground storage tanks. CHS and our trade associations have certainly voiced our opinions on that. We are talking with lawmakers and regulators all the time about the importance of getting this right, the safety aspects of it, but also the benefits that will come of it. Legislatively, we're dealing with tax incentives, things like that. We are getting bills introduced all the time. One introduced this week from Senator Grassley that will help the industry. We're seeing a lot of push towards renewable fuels, benefits for that. And so we are constantly in contact with our champions, trade associations, the EPA as well. We still do have some learning to do about how this EPA will go about pushing to expand E15 offerings. They are still relatively new. Been in the Administrator Regan has been in the job a couple months, and he's got a lot on his plate. Staffs are still filling up at EPA, so we do still have a little bit of learning to do. But day by day, we're learning more and more about this administration and how they'll approach E15 and pushing.
Thanks, Dan. We're having just a small amount of audio issue. I'm sure the back room guys are working on that, but maybe if you lean a little bit closer to your speaker as you respond to the next thing, Dan. So we got the Biden administration, new administration. You mentioned that they're new and they got a lot on their plate, and but yet I know all of us read and hear a lot about the aspirations of the new administration. Infrastructure bill seems to gather a lot of that space right now. What do you got to tell us around that bill and how that could affect the cooperative systems energy business, whether it be renewables or otherwise?
Yeah, the infrastructure bill particularly is going to be a tricky one. As some may know, the Biden administration put out a proposal for about a $2.25 trillion bill, which spans a lot of different areas, whether it's traditional infrastructure like roads and bridges, to other things like childcare, things like that. They did receive some pushback on that from the Republicans in the House and Senate. About a week ago, the Biden administration then pared that down to about a $1.8 trillion bill. And just earlier today, actually, Senate Republicans released a bill that is just south of $1 trillion, where it's focused on what I would call traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, waterways, including broadband. We have been advocating for some of that funding to go towards one of the major hurdles in E15 adoption, as I mentioned, underground storage tanks. That's going to be a major problem for some retailers to retrofit those tanks to offer E15. It's a big investment for them. There were federal programs last year called the HBIP, Higher Blends Infrastructure Improvement Program, that proved to be very popular, that provided federal funds for retrofitting those underground storage tanks. And we think there should be more money in any infrastructure bill. If we're spending $1 trillion or $2 trillion, some additional funding to help retailers with their underground storage tank issues could really go a long ways to additional E15 adoption.
So Dan, fair to say, as we monitor these things and as you help bring the CHS voice wherever we think it can make a difference, we see a infrastructure bill that the headlines and a lot of the funding around it end up more in the electric vehicle kind of infrastructure space. And so a CHS position would be, we understand that, but how can we reduce some of these infrastructure barriers to renewable fuels that while they may displace some traditional hydrocarbon fuels, they're important to our system, important to our owners and our customers. And so is that fair to say, Dan? I mean, that'd be an example of an approach we take when we're out there.
Yeah, definitely. I'd probably characterize it as saying, a lot of my discussions with policymakers are kind of surround the idea of the future of liquid fuel. You can't open a newspaper or go online and read the news without hearing about the really, really big push for electric vehicles, whether that's tax incentives to buy them, whether that is a huge chunk of the infrastructure bill going towards EV charging stations around the country. But my message is really, EVs are certainly going to be a major part of reducing carbon emissions, which is probably or arguably the number one priority for the Biden administration and for the congressional majorities. But EV adoption is going to be much slower it'll be slowly adopted, in CHS's footprint, what I call kind of the T of the country, versus the West Coast and the East Coast, where you've seen electric vehicles become very popular very quickly. So something that, I kind of kick around with members of the House and Senate is, a big part of what we can do to help carbon reduction in the middle of the country, in rural America, is E15 adoption, where, I don't think anybody's combines are going to be powered by, electricity and batteries anytime soon. Our ATVs and things like that aren't going electric anytime soon, but there's still stuff we can do. Our large 4x4s, I know President Biden was touring Detroit earlier this week, or maybe it was late last week, and was in a all-electric Ford F-150. But those are going to be adoption slow. But what we can do is we can push E15 to reduce emissions that way. And so while there is the big push in EVs, I was disappointed to not see almost $0 for biofuels in the infrastructure package. However, we're working with our champions in both the House and Senate, the Congressional Biofuels Caucus members, folks like that, to make sure that we do get funding and that they know that we can contribute to the administration's goal of carbon reduction.
Thanks, Dan. And just a reminder to everybody, we're getting, I can ask these three folks some more questions, but I'd rather take your questions and get their reactions to them. I've got a couple in the Q&A. So if you got a question or a topic you'd want us to comment on, just throw that in the Q&A, use that button at the bottom. While we get a few people sending us what's on their mind to comment on, maybe, Dan, we'll just shift gears a little bit. You look forward a 2 or 3 months on Capitol Hill. What should our owners, local cooperatives and producers be thinking about or expecting?
Well, we'll definitely, as I mentioned, the conversation on infrastructure investments are still going to be going forward. I think they should be expecting the federal government to be investing in rural broadband. So if you are having a hard time getting quality internet, things like that, I think that is going to be a bipartisan issue where rural broadband will certainly get quite a bit of funding. There's going to be tax bills that are going to be pushed. There are going to be incentives for reducing carbon emissions on the farm. There are a number of bills. My colleague Will is following what's called the Growing Climate Solutions Act very carefully, which incentivizes farmers in rural America to make investments to capture carbon and to decrease carbon emissions. So those we're going to keep seeing those come out. I think there won't be much of a break as it relates to things like clean energy, incentives to carbon-free, carbon-neutral technologies, things like that, particularly as it relates to energy, and try to wind down the dirtier fuels. But however, like I said, the future of liquid fuels is something that I spend a lot of time talking about. We can invest $1 trillion in EVs, but we have things like there are issues with that. California can have a hard time keeping lights on the way it is, and so how are they going to get all of that additional electricity if they need to power their cars as well? So liquid fuels will be here for a long time. We're working together with a lot of our trade associations, both on the refinery side and the renewable fuel side of things, to make sure that we try to speak with one voice and to make sure that the administration and the Congress still know that we're here and going to be an important part of our energy supply for the foreseeable future.
And thanks, Dan. And an example I'd share with the group on that, where we try to use our voice and bring stakeholders together would be, looking forward about the competitiveness of liquid fuels, and going even past E15 and thinking about working with OEMs and the high efficiency engines need for a higher octane fuel, and what role could both, traditional hydrocarbon based fuel and a greater share of ethanol, how could they come together as industries and meet that need for this higher octane? So that's just an example where Dan and I have been in meetings, and both with government officials and with stakeholders from those industries, to try and bring our voice to that's an example of where we could play a role. So
to that point, Darren, it was encouraging to see national corn growers adopt a policy provision of pushing for a 95 run, which is something that we're certainly supportive of. That aligns well with, for instance, our refinery trade association, AFPM, also accepts a 95, or pushes for a 95 RON. So those are places where I see the industry aligning, and another big part of my time is speaking with those stakeholders and trying to get us all on the same page forward together.
Let's get into a couple questions coming from the more than 100 people that are joining us here. First one I'll go to is for you, Dan, since I've got you on the screen here. Have there been any kind of taxation talks around electric vehicles with more EV cars and trucks coming? How will they contribute to road taxes? So what I take is behind that, whether people commonly realize it or not, that the road funds, a lot of the infrastructure is funded by tax on gasoline and diesel products today. So if those products, there's going to be less usage, then there'll be less taxation. How do you backfill the dollars, right? Any comments?
Yeah, so this is also an evergreen conversation, is how to make sure that those people who use the roads pay for the roads that they're using. And as the question points at, EVs aren't paying into the Highway Trust Fund for the repaving of the roads and the upkeep of the roads. Incredibly timely question. Just yesterday, the Senate Finance Committee, which is the tax writing committee for the U.S. Senate, held what's called a markup of a clean energy bill, and there was a number of provisions related to EVs. Mostly, the big ones were around point of sale rebates, where they're going to give you, thousands of dollars to buy an EV. Of course, there were conditions on that. It's got to be under $80,000. It's got to be an American-made EV, things like that. But the question about EVs paying for their share it's a tricky one, and I don't know if anybody's come up with a really good answer for it. I know, I believe it's California. They pay a flat fee of, I think, $100 or something like that on an annual basis to help fund. But when it relates to EVs paying their fair share on an annual basis, Congress hasn't figured that out. But I think that absolutely will be part of the discussion going forward. Something they'll need to find out and figure out. There's a lot of demand for that, actually on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, I think Dustin might have something to add on this, so we can bring Dustin on maybe with some insights on how an area like California is trying to tackle that. But I'd just say, for a long time, even on a state or federal basis, trying to move a gas tax half a cent or a penny can be a really arduous road. So I do think this is something to watch, and it's going to be one of those things that maybe isn't in the headlines today, but it's going to have to be resolved in the transition. But Dustin, any thoughts from your seat on this?
Yeah, I think Dan covered it pretty well. California is obviously a state pushing heavy into electric, and they recognize that their revenue for road taxes was going down, and so they did put in I might get this wrong, I think it was a $200 fee when you purchase an electric vehicle that goes to the DMV there. And then, as Dan said, an annual sort of registration tax attributed to electric vehicles to partially offset that lost gas tax.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Let's take a different twist on maybe a somewhat similar topic. A question that came in: is there an opportunity for CHS to install solar or wind farms at some of our locations across the territory, a country location, a facility, et cetera, to offset what carbon footprint that we have? And be glad to get really anybody's reflections. I'll start with my own. I think the short answer is yes, there is likely some opportunity there. It's not something we've done a lot of. I think just myself, I've been a part of probably 3 or 4 studies on that have come across our desk, or we've had people work on, where it wasn't quite the right opportunity for CHS just yet. But I would not be surprised to see that in our future. I know we likely have, plenty of people attending that have done that themselves, particularly if we have producers, listening in. But Dan or Dustin, any reaction to that?
I probably am not the best person to speak on the possibility of wind farms or solar. I can speak on the tax credits available. There certainly are federal tax credits available for things like that. But CHS is also working hard with internal working groups, which I'm a part of, to cut our carbon emissions and sequester that carbon, capture it and sequester it. Particularly, our 2 ethanol plants give us a great opportunity to do that. And so we are moving in that direction. It is, what's the example? The ocean liner versus a speedboat. But we are moving in that direction to try to cut our carbon emissions, and I think CHS is well on its way. There's a 45Q tax credit, which is called for carbon capture, and I've been speaking internally with our tax folks about possibility of taking advantage of that. So those conversations are going, and we're serious about
it. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Take one more, and then if I think we will have exhausted kind of the ones that are in. Again, if somebody else has got another topic, maybe it's something we haven't even covered today, but you're interested about it in the energy space, feel free to throw it in the Q&A. Of course, Colonial Pipeline is something that probably many people didn't even know what those words were 3 or 4 weeks ago, and has made the words cyber attack seem really real in a really material way. I think before we had, as just business people and people going about our lives, you associated that more with a credit card problem you might have in your own personal life, more so than a pipeline. So question around how's that affect us? Didn't really have a direct effect on CHS. We don't do business in the geographic space and refined fuels where those systems operate. So there was no operational impact that I know of. Jason, maybe you got a comment when I'm done. So operationally, no direct impact. As an industry, a huge learning opportunity. I think for anybody in the pipeline business is to see what one of the nation's biggest and frankly, a piece of infrastructure the country relies on a lot. Go through that makes it real. CHS has taken several steps in recent years to avoid such an issue. But I would say we're also in the learning category. We've done, kind of test tabletop things with some of our pipelines to make sure we're ready. We have an internal audit group that looks into this, a number of steps. But I can tell you that CHS and everybody else in that part of the business probably going to double down in looking at that. Yeah, Jason, any further comment from you in terms of how that affected supply and that sort of thing?
No, I think you hit it right on the head, with us making sure that, our own house is in order when it comes to cybersecurity. I think more so on the supply side, if you look at it, although not the scale to the pandemic or to the issues in Texas with the cold weather, but I think if you look at it once again, Colonial is the biggest pipeline in the United States and is connected to the Gulf. And we had a shutdown of some refineries again, hurting the supply position in the country as a whole. So indirectly not affecting us, or directly not affecting us, but indirectly, once again, just taking some of those supplies offline, not for nearly as long a period of time, but anytime you take more supply out of the market, those charts, it's going to show up in those charts that, diesel supplies are again low, that we already knew that, but we made them lower. Gasoline supplies lower. And we're getting really into that driving season. So indirectly an effect, directly, you're right, not. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Jason. It caused some industry disruptions on the supply balance, and a good example of, how fast things can change. Not very many months ago, Jason and I would have been invited to this around the table meeting, and we would have been talking about record high inventories and in some products and regions, and trying to understand how that's going to change. But you have a couple of unplanned events. Clearly, some progress in the country opening back up again from the pandemic, and the market is right back to almost a short position in some regions. So good reminder on how quickly things can change. Another question come in here. Thank you. Any thoughts on Shell being sued by the Dutch government for climate change? I would just tell you, I'm still forming my own thoughts on that. That's pretty incredible things happening the last few days that involve one of the world's largest oil companies in Shell. And what I mean by that, for those that have not been around it, as I understand it, pretty fresh news. Maybe Dustin, you can think about any reflections you got on this. I know you follow these things pretty closely, but you got the Dutch government really challenging Shell to lower their emissions in a big material way over both the immediate term and the longer term. And as I understand it, they responded well with, here's some of our plans to do that. Perhaps ironically, or perhaps not, Shell's also been divesting of some of their refining assets and reinvesting in some other areas. So we're watching that really close. And what could those kind of things mean to U.S. government policy? What could it mean to us at CHS? But any reflections you want to add, Dustin?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. I think you answered that very well. I would add that just this week, some news out of Exxon here as well. An activist investor group who was successful in placing a couple of board members on the Exxon board with a similar type of agenda, unhappy with the progress being made by that company to address climate change. So I think what we can expect is more of that type of thrust, given the comments that Dan provided, some of the uncertainties that take shape in Washington here. It still feels to me like we're very early in that process, so that we have some very aspirational goals. We've been in that type of environment in the past. This isn't the first time we've heard about large ramp ups in electric vehicle use and other types of solutions. But we'll see how this plays out as well. The only thing I would add, and it was similar to what Dan mentioned, is liquid fuels will need to be a part of that solution going forward. Of course, renewables a growing portion of that, but you'll see more government interaction, like in the Shell case, and then you'll have the financial implications that we'll probably see in the more capitalistic markets like the United States that may drive some of that direction.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. I think for what it's worth, I don't think this kind of conversation is limited just to the business of oil and gas. While that might be a bit of a headliner, especially with some of the world's largest companies being a part of those discussions, but it spills over into a lot of spaces, a fertilizer space, a food space in general. So this is just another layer of things that we'll get to navigate going forward. Had a couple more questions here, Jason. I think these are going to be more closer to home for you. while we're on the topic of supply, you mentioned a few times in your comments and then in the Q&A, the question is, with the low supply, do you foresee a pricing increase for the summer?
The best way I can answer that one is typically when you have lower supplies, prices are going to be on the rise. So, and I truly believe there's a lot of pent up demand from this pandemic. I think we're coming out of it. People are feeling better and better. More people are getting vaccinated. I think people are still a little leery to fly, but I think this summer we're going to see a tremendous amount of driving and a really big driving season. Some of the national parks and state parks, I know people, you can't even book a spot. And I admit I'm a camper and I can't even get a spot because they're so booked out, which to me means people are going to be traveling. Therefore, I think prices are going to be higher with those low supplies. And we're going to see more of a gradual increase because I think a lot of that price rise has done the work in the spring here. But I do think we're still going to see prices rise from this point.
I can't disagree with that, Jason. I mean, we always remember we compete in a global market, that there's a lot of global forces on prices, but when you just look at the supply and demand dynamics that you and I see today, that would suggest higher prices, not lower in the short run.
Darren, I will put an asterisk by that. That was my opinion, and so it is definitely my opinion, my best guess. So
right. Based on the facts you have, right?
Based on the facts that I have. So,
a little bit different question, but I'll also ask you, Jason, to comment on bio credits back to customers. And I think in this case, primarily thinking about local cooperatives. Has that changed at all, and is it still $1 per gallon? So maybe I'll answer the first part. There is a federal tax credit of $1 a gallon on biodiesel. That's been a bit of a journey with a lot of history to it. And what I mean by that, we could talk for more time than we have about how there was retroactive activity and ways we needed to manage that. Now it's set in place for a period of time that allows us to manage that a little more efficiently. Jason, you want to comment on maybe what we did recently and what that looks like going forward?
Yep. And you hit it right on the head. It has a lot to do with 18 and 19. If you look at it, that credit, was out there, wasn't known. So people weren't able to price it into the price of the fuel. Therefore, when we gathered that information, we got our credit back, we were able to pay, what portion we could garner back to the customer. Going forward, like you said, the credit is actually known. Therefore, it is in the price of the fuel. That dollar credit is still there, but it's in the price of the fuel. So we will not be paying a credit out. It's already in the price of your fuel.
Yeah, versus the retroactive. Sometimes we were a year or more retroactive, trying to figure that out. So.
I think we paid out 2 years in that 1 year when it came out, and then they came out with the information going forward that it was available to. So.
Right. Last question I've got in the queue here is really similar to the previous pricing one, Jason, but I'm going to read it anyway. And if there's anything you want to add, you sure can. End users, including farmers, are nervous about the direction the administration is heading with fuels and are wanting to contract next year's fuel needs. Essentially, they're asking, you think we should commit to contracting next year's fuels needs and work with customers on that, or is that a bit of a overreaction to an administration change? Again, we can give our best opinion, whether it's Jason or me, or for that matter, Dan or Dustin, based on what you see today. Any difference in the way you responded to that previously, Jason?
No, I would a little bit. If you look at it, this administration is in place for 4 years. So this administration is not going anywhere. And I think somebody said it before, that when we have an administration like this the regulations are coming at us 100 miles per hour, whereas with the previous administration, they were coming at us 70 miles an hour. So I don't think those things are going to stop coming at us. And I think fuel prices are going to stay higher. I can't tell somebody whether they should or should not contract, but I can tell a grower or a construction person this. If you like the price and it fits into your budget and it works for you, would I contract? Sure. That's what I do. It's kind of like selling your grain, the same thing. If it makes you money and you feel comfortable with it, I would recommend you don't do it. if you don't feel comfortable with it and it doesn't make you money, I wouldn't do it. So that's just my opinion on it.
Sounds too practical for global volatile markets to me, Jason, but we'll.
I think most people know me. I'm a pretty simple person. So.
Well, that exhausts the questions that we had come in. Thanks very much to those of you that engaged in that way. Appreciate hearing what's on your mind. And I hope for all of you, again, more than 100 that have joined us, and for those that might watch a recording later, thanks very much for investing some time in this. We'd love to hear your feedback. Send any one of us an email or give us a call if you got some feedback on how we can improve these for the future. And thanks to my colleagues, Jason, Dustin, and Dan, in sharing your insights with our customers and owners today. So with that, wish you all a safe rest of your day, and thanks again.